Today we're talking about athleticism. We've all been told that we need to be more athletic to throw harder. But what does that actually mean? And how do you even train athleticism? Well, that's the question my co-founder Albertus and I are going to answer today. We'll go through examples, the traps behind training athleticism, and how to actually train it to increase pitching velocity. So I'm not going to waste your time. Let's get straight into the video. What do you consider athleticism, and how do you train it in pitches to increase performance?
There are two types of athleticism that I consider. One is just an overarching athleticism of this guy can run quick, jump fast, and it's really just neuromuscular ability, recruit areas and use them in ways that translate towards physical capabilities. And then we have more of a sports-specific athleticism, which is the ability to translate your general athletic capabilities into a niche capability, translates into higher production of positive qualities in your sport.
I think that's super interesting because when I hear about athleticism, no one ever talks about the two types of athleticism, right? And what you talked about with general athleticism, I think is a little bit easier to understand. But could you go a little bit in depth about sport-specific athleticism?
We've all been on a team with a guy who has a 40-plus inch vertical, 6'5", 60, and we put them on a baseball field and they're really bad. You look at them and based off of their athletic principles alone, you're like, okay, this guy is the craziest freak athlete that I've ever seen in my life. But you put him in a niche sport athleticism situation and he struggles greatly. When we refer to athleticism, we can't only think of one bucket. We can have a guy who can bench press 315 and do all those other things that I just named. So he can be really good physically, but then struggle with niche aspects of creating separation, rotating, maybe it's fielding ground balls, maybe it's for a pitcher being able to control his pitches, because that is a part of athleticism, is being able to control where your ball goes based on how you can control the energy in your body, because that's what command is. It's not just a release of the hand. It's athleticism translated into a specific result that we're trying to learn how to be consistent with, and those specific feels over time are how we build consistent command. So even athleticism feeds into being able to command a baseball in niche parts of certain sports, right? So general athleticism can be developed in the weight room. It can be developed doing sprints, explosive work, and training stimulus. But sports-specific athleticism has to be developed by very specific constraints that adhere towards certain things we're trying to achieve in the sport, such as plyo drills, med ball drills, through our mechanics, long toss in certain aspects, pull downs. All of those things are feeding into a niche athleticism. So we're not going to take a football player and go have him do pull downs to go get better at football. It might increase his athleticism a tiny bit because he's never done it before, but it won't increase his niche athleticism to compete in the sport, right? So we can always provide a large amount of varying degree when it comes to approaching the training economy and turning the person into a general, really well-rounded athlete, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to translate into the sport. Because if there's a disconnect in neuromuscular connections somewhere in their mechanics or their throw, or their central nervous system's not allowing their body to get into certain positions because of red flags from the brain, from previous trauma, injuries, genetics, etc., we're missing the mark, right? Because you can be a great athlete and suck at a sport. And you can be a subpar athlete and be really good at certain niche aspects of a sport. And that doesn't mean that you're not athletic. It just means that you're more of a sports-specific athlete according to the tasks at hand, right?
So I have a quick question on that. So for example, like pitches, right? What is the difference between like pitching mechanics and skill athleticism?
Yeah, so pitching mechanics is a form of athleticism that's us trying to generate as much energy and stretch at the same time as possible. So it's an entirely different form of athleticism. We call this biotensegrity, right? The ability to basically create a diagonal fascial stretch across your body as much as possible. And that's totally different than every sport. Like if we look at a sprint, we'll have certain areas of our body contracting as certain areas are going into a minor form of a stretch. But we're not running like this. We're not like creating a maximal stretch. If we did that, we'd run considerably slower. So, general athleticism is really just normal movements in a space, such as sprinting, jumping, all those things singled out. And then baseball throwing athleticism is like, how much can we sequence this energy up the chain without getting in our way while using force production to the maximum of our abilities. So,
But would you say like if someone has good pitching mechanics, then they have good baseball niche athleticism? Or is that not true?
yeah, I would say so. I'd say that they have really good niche athletic abilities to throw a baseball because you've got to be athletic as hell to throw a baseball hard. It's just like plain and simple because your motor
Mm.
recruitment at that point is like top tier, dude. So you could take somebody who's really good at throwing a baseball and you could teach them how to be a better athlete over everything, and you'd have a much higher success rate teaching the baseball thrower how to be an athletic person elsewhere than you would trying to translate anybody else into baseball.
Mm. Mm.
Especially because in baseball, your shoulder structure completely changes. Like over time, your shoulder joint will start to roll back. So like if you look at the throwing arm of um, like a throwing arm X-ray or MRI of a person's shoulder who's played baseball versus a person who doesn't throw, the socket will naturally sit more externally rotated because of how many times we've thrown and had to lay back. And so the body creates an adaptation to sit the shoulder socket differently so that we can achieve external rotation easier. It's like our sport is literally so different that it forces your body to completely change its structure, which is like
Mm.
normal for some sports in certain ways, but not that extreme, And if you don't start throwing at a young enough age, your body also won't create that adaptation. And then you basically will potentially never be good at baseball. And that's a real thing that like nobody talks about, you know. It's like these people all have this adaptation. And then you see the greatest athlete on planet Earth go try to throw a baseball and he throws it 60 miles per hour. And no matter what you give him, he can never be good. And his arm's always pushy. He's got a super elbow driven throw. You can give him heavy balls, stretch the area out and everything, and his body will
Mhm.
never create that adaptation. So,
The thing I'm trying to get my head around is like, okay, like if you have a guy who's really athletic and a beast of an athlete and you teach him good mechanics, like, isn't that just like a skill that he got better at rather than like the baseball specific athleticism that he gained? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, what's the
I
difference
would
between
say so,
like,
bro, but considering the skill is required to even exist in the game, I would say that it's athletic, because if you can't throw in this game, whether it's shortstop, second base, catcher, first base, pitcher, bro, you'll never survive. Like it's a required
mm,
part of the fucking sport. It's like over
oh,
70% of it. You know what I'm saying? Like if people can't throw, the sport wouldn't exist. I would say like a niche athleticism version of baseball would be
would
like,
just be, it could just be like throwing in general, right? And then like the skill is pitching.
yeah, the skill
And
is
then,
pitching and translating the pitching. You know what I'm saying?
that makes sense.
So like the skill is taking that and making more of it. So like, oh, this guy is super athletic and throws 100, but he walks a lot of people and can't control his off speed. Like he has bad skill usage of the niche athleticism. Like he has bad abilities to do the niches of the niche, like the depths and the details there. But that's more
Mm.
of an acquired skill, like you said. That's a good way to put it, but it's definitely not but the throwing is the athleticism, bro. Like for javelin, the throwing is the only athleticism.
No, that makes sense. It's like general athleticism and then the niche athleticism, which is just throwing in general, and then obviously pitching is just like the skill.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like let's say we have a cornerback and he runs a 6'2", 60, but he sucks at cutting routes. Like he's bad at the finesse part, but he's really good at the athleticism part. Like he's a phenomenal athlete, but he has no idea how to do the niche part of the stuff that like really puts you ahead after you've achieved the athleticism and the ability. That's how I view it, at least, bro. I don't think anybody really thinks about this a lot. I think that they're all just like bench press speed, counter movement, squat jump, run fast, and teach them how to hit ball. And it's like, yeah, that's great, guys, but like the finesse is what gets you to the big leagues, bro. Very rarely does somebody who just overpower people just make it to the big leagues because they overpowered people. And then you have people who do it like Ryan Helsley, who I know, so I'm going to use him as an example, who throw 100 plus miles per hour, but they don't have any finesse. And so then they go and put up a 2 ERA before everybody's used to it. And then everybody's seen it a few times. And then he puts up a 6 ERA because the depth's in the details, bro. Like, and he didn't have enough details. So you can even be a top tier athlete with top tier athletic production and throw 105 miles per hour and people smoke it. And we also know that with Jordan Hicks, like two people from the same team, just pure overpowering human beings who are like some of the most athletic throwers of all time this last year, sitting 100 miles per hour. But Chapman sits 100 miles per hour and mastered parts of his finesse this year and had the greatest year of his life, having a focus on like the details instead of everything, Yeah, bro, pretty crazy.
All right. So before we get into like how to actually improve the niche type of athleticism, do you have any examples of guys that we've worked with that have increased either part of athleticism, which has really helped their pitching velocity go up or their pitching performance go up?
Yeah, so the main person that I think about when it comes to improving, let me think. I would say Hunter's a good one. Kalen, bro. Kalen Babchuk. For sure. He's a really good one. He was in the low 70s and then now he's hitting 84. Kalen was a super, super unathletic player and he had a really good build. And it was like, hey, there's only 2 or 3 things we really need to fix in your mechanics that are low-hanging fruit right now. But your athleticism in general and in a niche way when it comes to baseball are just both well below average. And so he was a player where a lot of the focus was on athletic development because we tackled the mechanical issues pretty early on, and got from low 70s to 80 miles per hour. And at that point, it just became, hey, we just need to continue to tackle athleticism stuff, get you more explosive, get you able to do your sprints a little bit quicker, learn how to accelerate from that, fire the central nervous system in specific ways, and just teach him the basics of athleticism. And that helped translate to him because he was able to fix the issues in his delivery while also leveling up his ability to compete against everyone in the athleticism bucket. Because he's got the build, lanky dude, super, super good movement and fluidity, but really bad ability to translate it into the niche because his generalized athleticism was really bad. And so his throwing athleticism was higher than his generalized athleticism. So when we raised that, he had a big velo jump paired with the mechanical adjustments. And then we have players where we really don't even need to focus on athleticism at all, like Simone, like unbelievable mover, freak in the weight room, super explosive, super jacked. And he just had mechanical issues and then gets up to mid 90s from lower 90s because he just had to fix some mechanical issues. And yeah, we still had him doing explosive work and athletic stuff in the gym just to keep him primed and on a slight uptrend. But the main focus was like, hey, this guy's a great athlete. We need to catch up his throwing. And then you kind of re-examine and go from there. Because if we have a player whose throwing is way higher than the regular athleticism, or even vice versa, when we bring them to an equal stage, they might have shifts in their mechanics because they're going to be able to access different patterns that they've never had access to before, good or bad, right? It can go both ways at first. And this is why you have to monitor it. But when it's good, sometimes you kind of have to take a step back and watch what happens to these areas before moving forward, because you don't want to mess with something that's in the midst of development, right? And you know just as well as I do that, dude, sometimes the body will entirely shift the better we get at lifting or whatever, or sprinting, jumping, generalized athleticism. The body will adapt, and sometimes we'll move differently because our body can finally express itself how it wants to.
Okay, cool. So I think the last thing on this would just be how do you work on, obviously the first one's kind of self-explanatory, but how would you work on both of these athleticisms?
So when we're training athleticism, we're essentially trying to train an advanced form of proprioception and motor recruitment, right? So we're trying to help somebody's central nervous system be able to fire itself quicker, produce energy quicker. But we're also training the player to be able to feel things in space better actively through a conscious and subconscious spectrum, right? Because sometimes athleticism can just come from understanding what the body is doing in that area and building an awareness of that area. So this is why I'm so big on cues when it comes to niche baseball athleticism, because it gives you something to actively feel and work on. And then you go from never being able to feel an area to having full control over that area, understanding when it's breaking down, what it feels like when it goes wrong, what it feels like when it goes great. And then that allows you to translate it into more consistent, positive athletic results, like throwing harder, hitting the ball further, so on and so forth. And so I would always have the players start with the generalized athleticism things and see what they struggle with there, and then see if that struggle translates to the sport. So let's say we notice a guy whose 10-yard sprint time is really bad. Well, it more than likely means that that player drastically struggles with acceleration, because a 10-yard sprint is primarily all acceleration, right? And then we look at his 60-yard time and it's a little bit above average. Well, we might look at his pitching mechanics or his swing and see, okay, well, he struggles with acceleration here. How does he translate acceleration to this niche part of the sport? And that's where you can kind of use this to start to train this, right? Just train the bucket, as some people call it, that I don't really believe in. Typically, if they'll struggle with this, they'll probably struggle with expressing it in the niche form as well. So then you would take an active focus and be like, okay, we're going to teach this person how to accelerate in their sprints. We're going to teach this person how to accelerate better maybe when it comes to jumping and even doing explosive movements in the weight room. And then we're going to teach this person now how to apply that acceleration and those feels to the niche part of the sport, right? And give them cues and constraints that help both improve at the same time. We're not just going to tackle this one to tackle this one. We're going to tackle them simultaneously so that we're increasing that person's ability to accelerate through the whole spectrum. And so that's how it should always be approached. We shouldn't only tackle one to tackle the other. If we're going to have an acceleration focus, we might as well make sure it's good in the mechanics and the weight room and the sprints. You know, if we're going to have a force production focus, we might as well make sure it's good in the weight room and in the throwing, right? Because maybe that guy struggles with force production in the gym, and he also struggles with force production and force acceptance in the throwing mechanics, okay? And so we would want to tackle both of those simultaneously and pair the throwing drills to help get that better, along with the training economy in the weight room and sprints and everything else. So you can always find little pieces of the puzzle that you need from everything that exists, right? So people, I think, just need to stop training them singularly and realize they're two totally different things, right? And so instead of just shifting part of the training economy, let's start figuring out how can we improve every single low-hanging fruit that athlete has from being bad at these things. And sometimes in the mechanics as well, you might not want to improve it because it might lead to something good. So that's something to pay attention to as well. But the general industry sucks at training both. Everybody thinks that one equals the other. And it's like, no, we just got his 10-yard sprint time to a 117 from a 135, but he throws the exact same velocity. Okay. And it's because his mechanics are the exact same because we never applied the new principles into his throwing. So that's actually something we're kind of really starting to see on Twitter is everybody argue for specificity or against specificity. And the answer is you got to do everything. Like it all matters. And let's say we have a speed focus for a guy, like a top speed focus for sprints and lower power stuff in the weight room. We would want to pair him with a top speed focus when it comes to velocity. So maybe that's a pull down phase, a turn and burn phase, an underload plyo phase, an underload pull down phase. There's tons of different options. We can even do underload long toss with constraints, you know. But if we're going to have the focus here, the focus needs to be here as well.